Picture this, a room locked tight from the inside. There's a body, but there's no weapon, no way in, and no way out. It's the ultimate puzzle, right? The impossible crime. But are these crazy, baffling cases just stuff from mystery novels? Or do they happen in the real world? And if they do, is there some kind of key to unlocking them? Well, we're about to find out.
All right, so let's kick things off with one of the most infamous and honestly, one of the most perfect locked room mysteries of all time. I mean, this is a case that has had detectives scratching their heads for nearly 100 years.
So, let's go back in time. The year is 1929, New York City. We're talking about a small laundry business run by a Polish immigrant named Isidor Fink. Now, Fink, he was a pretty fearful guy, super paranoid about getting robbed in his neighborhood, which, was a bit rough. He basically lived and worked in the exact same room, and he kept that place locked down like a fortress. And the scene the police found, it just completely defied all logic. I mean, to even get inside, they had to lift a small boy up to crawl through this tiny little transom window over the door, and inside they find Fink. He'd been shot 3 times, close range, and yet the room was sealed shut. The door bolted, windows nailed down, key in the lock on the inside. And get this, no gun, no sign of a struggle, and not a single penny was missing. The police commissioner at the time basically just threw his hands up and called it unsolvable. So that's the million-dollar question, right? How was it done? It's the question that just hangs over every single one of these impossible crimes. How can someone commit murder and then just vanish from a sealed room? It seems like a total one-of-a-kind freak event. But what if it's not? What if there's a pattern here? What if these totally bizarre cases actually follow a kind of hidden set of rules?
Okay, so to get our heads around these real-world puzzles, we're actually going to turn to, of all places, the world of fiction. Yeah, you heard me right. The masters of the mystery genre, they've spent decades figuring out exactly how to pull off the perfect crime. And they might have just left us the key. So first things first, let's just make sure we're all on the same page about what we're talking about here. A locked room mystery is the ultimate howdunit. It's not about who did it, so much as how in the world they did it. The method is the whole mystery. And yeah, it's a huge deal in detective fiction, but like we just saw with Isidor Fink, this stuff has very real and very chilling counterparts.
And you know who understood this better than anyone? A guy named John Dixon Carr. He was the undisputed king of the locked room mystery. And his whole argument was that the impossible part of the crime isn't just a side effect. It's the entire point. It's a deliberate, calculated trick. It's misdirection designed to completely confuse everyone and point them away from a simple but totally wrong answer.
Carr even laid out a kind of blueprint for how these impossible crimes work. He broke them down into a few main categories, and we're going to focus on a couple of them today. And what's so fascinating is how we can take these frameworks from fiction and apply them to real unsolved cases. It gives us a totally new way to look at the evidence. All right, let's grab that first key from Carr's blueprint. The idea that what looks like a murder is actually a tragic but profoundly bizarre accident. And for this, we're jumping to a much more recent case, the deeply, deeply strange death of an MI6 codebreaker named Gareth Williams.
Okay, so back in August 2010, Williams was found dead inside a sports bag that was zipped up and padlocked. And the bag was in the bathtub of his London apartment. The details here are just staggering. The key to the padlock, it was inside the bag with his body. The apartment was locked from the inside. And forensically, there was absolutely no trace of anyone else ever being there. So faced with all this, Scotland Yard's initial thought was that it had to be an accident, maybe related to something called claustrophilia, which is a fetish for being in small and close spaces.
In this case is just the perfect example of two totally opposite stories at war with each other. On one side, you've got the accident theory. Williams did have a history of looking up stuff about bondage and escapology online. There's no mystery DNA. The apartment was locked from the inside. But on the other side, you've got facts that just scream foul play. I mean, experts tried over 400 times and failed to lock themselves in that bag. His own fingerprints weren't on the lock, the bag, or even the tub. The heat was cranked up high in the middle of August, and his phone had been wiped clean. It just doesn't add up.
And online, this debate is still raging. People who support the accident theory, like this Redditor, they argue that when you look at his personal history and the total lack of evidence of another person, all those big spy movie conspiracy theories just start to fall apart. The simplest explanation, they say, is that this was a private act that just went horribly wrong.
But then, of course, you've got the counterargument.
Other folks suggest that his personal history is exactly why he'd be a target for this kind of assassination. Like this user points out, intelligence agencies are masters of misdirection. I mean, what better way to get rid of someone than to make it look like a shameful personal accident? It creates the most confusion and discourages anyone from looking too closely.
So we're left with this perfect paradox. The very evidence that points to an accident, his personal interests, could also be the perfect cover for a murder designed to look like one. The puzzle itself just becomes this giant fog that completely hides the truth.
Okay, let's move on to another one of Carr's categories. This one covers crimes where the murder is committed from outside the locked room or where the scene is just deliberately staged. In these cases, the crime isn't just a murder, it's a whole performance, and it's meant to confuse and mislead everyone.
And we see this so clearly in two classic American cases where the killers didn't just take lives. They built a story. They left behind this whole stage set of bizarre, seemingly meaningful clues that, in the end, led absolutely nowhere. First up, Villisca, Iowa, 1912. An entire family and 2 young houseguests were murdered in their beds. But what's really haunting is what the killer did after the murders. They covered all the mirrors. They covered the victims' faces with sheets. They left a 2-pound slab of uncooked bacon behind. I mean, these are not the actions of someone who's in a rush to get away. This is a ritual. It's like symbolism without a key, a message that nobody can translate, and it was all designed to baffle.
And then you have the case of the Sodder children in West Virginia. On Christmas Eve, 1945, the family home burns to the ground, and 5 of the children are just gone. But look at the circumstances. The phone line was cut. The family's ladder, which they always kept right by the house, was missing, found later in a ditch. Both of their work trucks had been tampered with so they wouldn't start. It was a systematic sabotage that made any chance of rescue or escape totally impossible.
So in both of these cases, Villisca and the Sodders, the evidence points to someone who wanted to do more than just kill. They wanted to create an impossible scenario. In Villisca, it was this bizarre ritual. In the Sodder case, it was a vanishing act so complete that it seemed to defy the laws of physics. It led the parents to believe for the rest of their lives that their kids had been kidnapped, not killed in the fire.
So what happens when these perfect puzzles just never get solved? Well, the official investigation might go cold, but for the rest of us, the story is really just beginning. Decades, even a century later, these cases are more alive than ever. They found a whole new life in online communities, especially on places like Reddit's Unresolved Mysteries forum. You've got thousands of amateur sleuths digging into every tiny piece of evidence, coming up with new theories, and just keeping these stories from fading away. And you can really feel the emotional impact these stories still have. I mean, look at this comment about the Sodder case. It just perfectly captures the horror of that night, this cascade of impossible things happening one after another. It feels like being trapped in a bad dream. And it's that human element that really draws people in. And really, this gets to the heart of it all. These cases stick with us because they just refuse to be simple. For every single piece of evidence that points one way, there's another one that points in the complete opposite direction. They are the ultimate intellectual challenge, basically inviting every one of us to try and solve the puzzle that the professionals couldn't crack.
But you know, it's really worth remembering that while we treat these as these fascinating brain teasers, the spy in the bag, the children who vanished in a fire, they aren't just stories. At the heart of every single one of these perfect puzzles is an imperfect and often unending human tragedy for the families left behind with zero answers. They're just left with that impossible question: how?